Hey everyone, so today super stoked because Ultrasharp is back in a way. So real quick history like I like to do. A few years ago I had a panel called Ultrasharp. Now this was a CEP based panel, meaning it was like the previous kind of architecture for making panels in Photoshop. And it was great and it did sharpening on multiple frequencies and it was super clean and the algorithm was awesome. But eventually it got deprecated because of Adobe, and it was kind of a bloated panel anyway in terms of the code, and it was a little bit difficult to work with. And so when it got deprecated, I just kind of let it go and did sharpening in other ways. But over time, I have sorted a way to kind of recreate the Ultrasharp concept in a way that allows me to sharpen very strongly when I want to, and also leverage something called negative sharpness, which, yes, it's blurring, but we leverage it using positive contrast and negative contrast, or more or less contrast. And we're going to go over all of that over different examples here and talk about how it works. Now, a quick little thing about the technology in case you're curious. You can fast forward or click the chapter to the actual beginning of the demo, but to give you a little bit of the tech so you understand, the way it works is that it separates your image into multiple frequencies. Think of it like a multi-band frequency separation, which we have tools that do that directly if you want and can be leveraged similarly. However, this is specifically designed for sharpening and sharpening reduction of specific frequencies for any genre of image. So with that said, because of this multi-band decomposition, this wavelet decomposition simulation that we do, it allows you to control every frequency exactly the way you want. That is more or less contrast of every frequency. And for the most part, the 5 bands that I've chosen over testing work for pretty much everything. However, we also have manual options, which are going to show you how that works so you can kind of tailor it to your workflow and your images and the kind of looks that you want. But first, a demonstration of how clean it looks. So let's start with this picture here by my friend Ryan. Okay, so we have already a final image, but we're going to show you how clean the sharpening can be. All right, so we're going to run the very first one, the little star next to it, NVP Ultrasharp Pro Con. All that con means is that that's the way you control the sharpening and the reduction of sharpening at different frequencies. In this case, it's a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and we use the contrast slider. So let's go ahead and run that. It's a huge image, so it might take, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds. I'll fast forward if necessary. Let's run it real quick. All right, so with it done, what I'll mention up front is that it has taken your image and duplicated it on top of all your layers, okay, and then done this decomposition into multiple frequencies and put it all in a folder. So it's just another copy of it. So when to do this is the question I want to address up front. People tend to sharpen at the end of a workflow, and so do I. So that makes sense to me. So if you look at your image and you think, I love it, it's perfect, now I just want to add some sharpening, well, run this right on top of everything else, and that'll kind of, sort of cook in every single edit you have, color grading, finalization, etc., and then you can sharpen right on top. You can flatten that sharpen layer if you want to, but for now, it's separated in a way that we can control. And unlike a panel that has a floating window that you can slide sliders around and you get what you get, here we have layers that allow us to control things in really detailed ways that a panel can't give us. So let's talk about this. All right, so we have high frequency, medium high, medium low, and low, split up already and stacked on top of each other seamlessly. They're not really on top of each other. They're separated in such a way that they can be rebuilt perfectly seamlessly. So we're not adding sharpness. If we turn it off, there's no difference. We're not adding texture. We're not reducing texture. Everything is seamlessly decomposed and rebuilt. That allows us to sharpen however we need to sharpen, where we want to sharpen. So let's zoom in a little bit. Let's go to this wheel here. We're going to go to our highest frequency. You notice we have a brightness and contrast adjustment layer clipped down to the high frequency layer. Okay, so a couple of things to notice here. One, you never want to use brightness because it's going to do exactly what you think it's going to do, brighten and darken. I suppose you could use it if you wanted to brighten and darken right then, but that's not really where I would use it. I would just avoid the brightness slider. Second, by default, these come with the Use Legacy checkbox checked because we want a little bit more range. Without that checked, the contrast slider is a lot more throttled, way more throttled. And we want to have more, more oomph if we wanted it, either when we're increasing or decreasing contrast. So it's by default on Use Legacy. If you want it to be really, really subtle, turn off Use Legacy. In fact, one of our other actions, I'll show you in a minute, actually doesn't use legacy for that because we don't want it that strong. But in this case, let's go ahead and do it. We increase contrast and we see sharpening in that high frequency get increased. Say we turn it off for a second. This is the actual adjustment layer and we turn it back on. It's sharpening the very highest frequencies. Now, if we reduce it, then it softens, which is interesting because you might think, goodness, now it just looks like the shot isn't as sharp as it could be. Well, you've ruined it. Well, maybe I have, but that's not the point. The point is the ability to do it. So for example, if I go to the medium high frequency and boost that, it has a different sort of sharpening feel. The highest texture isn't what's being boosted. It's being left alone, but that secondary texture underneath is being boosted. In fact, if I were to reduce the contrast of that, you'll see, and I know it's hard to see on the video, you'll see that the high frequency is still there, but I've reduced the one right below it, creating a sort of soft focus. Not sure if that's good in large amounts, but every now and then, for example, if you come here to like medium, maybe let's try medium low, and let's reduce it a lot to show you. We've reduced it a lot. You see it kind of creates a weird blurring. Again, super subtle on video. In fact, let's go to the one above it so we can see a little bit more. We'll go to medium. If we reduce that, we see that it creates like a softening. Let's go and turn everything off and on. It creates a softening in that frequency that maybe will help smooth things out or clean things up or just give you the feel that you want. I recommend doing that lightly. It's not to say that your medium low or low frequencies need to be always reduced in sharpness or in contrast. No. It depends on whatever you want to do. But if you do reduce contrast, do it very subtly, because you can also turn it off completely. If you turn off the medium completely, now we get weird haloing because we've removed the frequency and our eye is like, what's happening? Things don't add up. So we probably don't want to remove it, but we can reduce. Now, don't get me wrong. Let's go ahead and reset that one. Ooh, put it back on use legacy. If I put the medium low and I increase it heavily, then we get that kind of look, which is a classic over sharpened look, which we don't always want. But when we leverage that subtly to create like a depth to our overall vibe, and then we push maybe the very high very strongly. Okay, again, hard to see, I know, and I'm zoomed out, okay? But off and on. That's extreme sharpening. And you'll notice that no matter how extreme I get, we don't have significant halo issues, even on high contrast points. Okay, now you can make halos show up if you want by really getting overdone with these things. But for the most part, this is, to me, too much sharpening, and it's still so wonderfully clean. That is the entire point and the hallmark of Ultrasharp. So let's go ahead and just kind of delete that one out. Let's try a portrait. Let's see what happens here. Okay. Let's run Ultrasharp Con again. We're going to get to the curves one in a minute. By the way, while this runs, I'll remind you, we have an action here called Convert to 16, because even if you're opening up an 8-bit image, when you go to sharpen, you really want to be in 16 to let all these calculations just sort of land better, if that makes sense. The rounding will be better. You won't have darkening or lightening. Just trust me on this. Even if you duplicate the document into another document and then change it to 16-bit and sharpen there for your final sharpening, you're going to be a lot happier. Trust me, Ultrasharp just does not work in 8-bit the way you want it to. It really needs to be in 16. Okay, so here we are. Let's go to our absolute strongest or our highest frequency and sharpen that. Can you see the difference there? Let's turn that off and on. Okay, we'll zoom in. I mean, I make all my videos on this channel in 4K, but I'm still going to zoom in. Off and on. You see how there's not haloing anywhere. It's still super, super strong. In fact, this is too much. But let's say I take the medium high and I sharpen that up. Again, crazy strong from there to there, but I don't have haloing. It doesn't look unnatural. It just looks like I've sharpened the crap out of an image. Again, too much, but I want to show you guys for the video. You can definitely see it in the hair. Off and on. You see how strong that sharpening is. Now, like I mentioned before, if you come here and say, for example, I don't know, go to the lower one, medium low, and then reduce the contrast, you'll soften those kind of broader frequencies, and maybe even the low ones. Let's soften that a little bit. This is not to say that it replaces a skin editing process. It shouldn't do that. But as you can see, off and on. Now we're focusing on the high frequencies and reducing those medium and medium low frequencies and the low one as well to kind of create a softened, sharpened look. But again, with minimal to no haloing. That's just, again, it's a style, it's a look. You could definitely do it too much. Again, if you turn off those frequencies, then you start getting weird haloing. You have sharpening, but at the same time, you're missing those frequencies. But reducing them a little bit can help kind of take your skin edit that you've already done and give it a final polish if that's the look that you want. Now, the opposite is also true as well. You can increase the lower frequencies if you want to bring more reality back into your shot. Okay, so something like this to this, we can actually increase it even more, something like that. And again, if you've done all your work, all your skin editing, all your contrast adjustments, everything else that you want to do, you can really dial this in a subtle way to create, look at that, so that's beautiful tonal contrast to it if that's what you wanted, without haloing or without noticeable haloing. You can really dig for it sometimes when you boost a lot, but without noticeable haloing. And if I boost a high one a lot, as you can see, I have a ton of sharpening effect happening, but super, super clean. Now, I'm doing it too much, like I said, but you get the basic idea there. Now, let's show you with another demo. And this time, we're going to use curves, because the curve sharpening allows for a couple of things. One, it allows for more intense either sharpening or reduction of sharpening via positive and negative contrast, but it also allows you to really craft those boosts exactly how you want. And in this case, I have some curves presets that come with the action that you can install. They're going to make it a little bit easier for you, not just, because presets are fast, but because it's very, very important that they are done a specific way. So I'm going to show you. Let's go ahead and run Ultrasharp Pro curves. Let's make sure this one's in 16. I believe it is. Yes, it is. Here we go. Let's run curves. All right, now that it's done, we have basically the same setup with the high, medium, high, medium, medium, low, and low. But now the modification layers, adjustment layers are curves and they're clipped down. So, if you have a curve and you darken and brighten, you get exactly what you expect. But what we need to do is boost contrast. And if you know anything about curves, then using a classic S curve is how we boost contrast, right? Well, that's true. So if I boost this up and then I pull this down, okay, then I get a sharpening effect. The hard part about doing an S curve manually is that you have to make sure that middle node right here is exactly at 128 and 128, or you're going to have that mid-range shift up and down. In other words, you're going to brighten or darken your image. This is why the presets exist. So right here, we have negative contrast 1 through 4 from mild all the way through extra, and positive contrast 1 through 4 from mild to extra. And we have the sigmoid 128, 128 base, meaning that if you choose that, you already have a node in the middle, and now you can choose to do your contrast boosting manually, knowing that that node is in place. If you move it, things will get darker and lighter. So there you go. Look at all that boosting I've done on that frequency. Very, very strong, beautiful, and smooth because it uses curves. It's a little bit more precise than just simply the contrast slider. The contrast slider is great for 90% of everything. But when you want to get really, really precise, we have the curves. And again, you have these presets. So if I went to positive contrast mild, you can see it's just very, very subtle. And I can choose moderate, and they're all neutralized because they have that node in the middle, extra, and of course, that was high, now this is extra, right? So we have super, super strong. And the opposite is also true. If I went down to the medium low, I can say, give me a negative contrast mild. There we go. Or you can say negative contrast moderate. And it's softening. See that? Now that may not be a great look. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. I'm just showing you what's possible with the curves. And like I said, you can always reset these. You definitely don't have to, do exactly what I'm showing you here, but you have that ability, whether you choose a preset, which you can install, and I recommend you do. Just open up a curves layer, a curves adjustment layer, and come here and go to load curves presets. And they come, like I said, with the action, so you can pop those in. Or you can choose the base and then do it on your own, whether you're increasing contrast to sharpen or you're decreasing contrast to reduce the sharpening effect of one of these, frequencies. Now, again, reducing the sharpness of the highest frequency just creates a blurred look, which may or may not be what you want. I don't know. But again, you have the power of all these together. And you can just close this folder out if you want, leave it on top as your sharpening information. In fact, I've been doing that lately. I will do all my sharpening and I'll have the rest of my workflow underneath. I'll save the PSD and then I'll have the sharpening sort of by itself, because I might export a certain way for social media and I might export another way for print, for example. Okay. I usually do social media, but occasionally I do print. So I have this ready to go so I can sharpen and modify it as needed, depending on where I want to send it. Now, for me, I tend to over sharpen for social media because I tend to reduce it anyway. And it kind of just looks a little bit crisper in some of the higher frequencies. When I do that reduction. So I enjoy that, especially on Instagram. It looks kind of cool to me. So I keep that here pretty strong. And then for print, I might take it down a little bit because I don't want to introduce unnecessary noise on a high grade large print. It's up to you. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Now, let's go ahead and close this one out. Let me close some of these out real quick and show you a couple other things. All right, so on this image by my friend Sanjeev, which you use quite a bit, we're going to show you the Ultrasharp contouring, and then we're going to talk about the manual ones, which are pretty straightforward, but we're going to still show you. And we have the blend diff buttons, which are all over most of our actions. They're included here as well, though they're not quite as dramatic as some of the other actions. They still do the same thing, but they just show up a little bit differently when you use them here. So let's go ahead and run contouring. I want to talk about that one for a minute. What that one really does is focuses on low frequencies only, meaning that none of the frequencies that are going to end up being produced are going to be sharp. You know, they're not going to be the fine hairs or the fine texture or anything like that. They're going to be the broad, wider ones. And that allows you to do an interesting sort of tonal shifting contrast thing. It's really hard to describe. You should play with it. So for example, if I go to the medium low and boost the contrast, note that it's not on Use Legacy. You see the look I'm going to get. You see what happened there? It's very subtle. Let's reduce it. Okay, see that? Increase it. Interesting, huh? So off and on. It creates an interesting contrast sort of contouring that's really hard to describe, and you really need to play with it to see what you can do with it and see if it can be something interesting for you. So for example, there it is, the medium. I'm going to boost that quite a bit, and maybe the low, I'm going to reduce it a whole lot. You never know. Off and on. Maybe I'll come back to the medium, maybe not quite as strong. Zoom in a little bit so we can see the other frequencies. Now, because these are all super high frequencies, yeah, bringing in haloing will be very, very easy. So for example, there I boosted the high, which is still pretty low. Okay. And there might be some haloing in there that we may or may not like. So really, this is like a broad contrast manipulation function for different frequency ranges, all being low. I kind of created this almost on accident, and I've been playing a lot with it. There's like a soft focus, hazy look. I've been playing with it, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to leverage it yet in a way that I can teach formally. Like, here's what I do and why. Not sure, but I did create it because I think it's fun, off and on. And I recommend that you play with it and see what, I don't know, see what you can come up with. You might come up with something cool and decide, hey, yeah, this final contour shift works great on landscapes, or maybe it works great on product or something like that. I don't know. But it's just a way to focus on the low frequencies to create contour contrast shift is what I'm calling them in those broad low frequencies. So play around with that for sure. Now let's go ahead and run manual con. If you know MVP actions, you know how this is going to work. Duplicate the background. Actually, is this one on 16? Let's go ahead and convert it anyway. Oh, it wasn't. Okay, let's convert it anyway. Cool. So let's go to Ultrasharp Pro manual con. Okay, so now we can choose every single frequency that we want. So if you're, for example, let's say you're really, really focused on really dialing in those fine frequencies and you want to be able to control them in really, really incremental detail. Okay, cool. Let's do a 1 for the first layer, a 2 radius for the next, maybe a 4, an 8, and a 12. Okay. And now the rest of it is handled. All the extractions happen, blah, blah, blah. And now it's all perfectly set up and seamless, like I said. So let's go, for example, to these rocks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more for you guys. So the very, very highest frequency we can boost like this. Whoa, that's kind of messy. Let's take that down a little bit, or even just sort of reset it. Let's see about medium high. Okay, medium high has one kind of look. That's kind of cool. And if we come to the high and reduce it, what do we get? Ooh, interesting. We get a strange sort of result there. Off and on. Our lower frequencies are gone and the higher frequencies, the higher frequencies are really reduced and the lower frequencies are stronger, or maybe just the opposite. Let's take down that kind of mid-high and just keep the absolute thinnest, the crispiest highs. Interesting. What about this water? It's sort of blurry there. This is where it can get interesting. We're boosting sharpness on frequencies that simply don't really show up in the water. But what is showing up in the water is noise. So if we really, really didn't want this to happen, we can do one of two things. We can mask out the sharpening effect. Okay, we're just simply on layers, right? So we can take a paintbrush, paint with black, and on the medium contrast boost, we can just mask that out. Oop, let me not get the rock. We can mask out the water, and you can do this more carefully, believe me. And you can even mask out the water on the high frequency. That's one option, but you can also go to the actual frequency layer itself, put a mask on it, and completely remove that frequency from the water. Okay, and now the water has that soft, sort of creamy look to it because you're not just boosting the noise. That might be a little bit extreme, and you can also use density on that mask to take that down. But you see, go off and on. I'll put it a little stronger so we can all see. Okay, so we go off and on. We have sharpened the rocks. We have sharpened everything overall, but we removed certain frequencies from areas where they don't really exist. Yeah, I can even bring it right back to that piece of rock there. Okay, who knows how useful that could be for you if you're very, very particular about how you're sharpening. It might be useful for you to remove a certain frequency from a certain area of the shot. You never know. It could just be noise and you want to remove it. You can do a subject selection and then inverse it. For example, let's say on a portrait, and everything that's in camera blur, you can remove those frequencies, but sharpen everything else. Now, you can just select the subject and sharpen the subject only, but why not clean up the background a little bit if you really want to? You can just remove the frequencies that you don't want. And that is why the masking is so powerful compared to even our previous panel of Ultrasharp. Now, I just want to show you real quick. We also have the manual curves one, so we're going to run that. And of course, same story here. Let's go really silly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And it's going to do all the extractions based on your numbers. And boom, there we are. Now we can take the curves, for example, and put it on contrast positive. And that's going to really boost the highest frequency. See that? And let's say we want number 2, which is one step up. We can increase that if we really want to. Cool. You can technically even reduce number 2, but leave number 1. Creates an interesting sort of feel. Very difficult to see on the video. But here again, okay, we have these frequencies here. We can go to medium if we really wanted to, or even medium low. Create a mask on the actual frequency layer. And then we can simply remove that if we wanted to. Okay, I didn't seem to do a whole lot of that frequency there. Let's see what about medium. Let's remove that. Okay, not a whole lot there either. Obviously, this is, I did it so finite with the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's not a whole lot to it. So, but let's say I did all of that. Ooh, that really did it. We found it on the highest frequency. Cool, cool. Let's make it like a 50% brush. Okay, and now if I really wanted to, for some reason, I can boost the sharpness of the rocks. And I can remove the frequencies from the water to create an extra soft, creamy, blurry look. And I can dial it in just right, by changing the density again of the layer mask if I really want to. And if I want to take the time to really, really do that, instead of like, I don't want to just sharpen, I want to remove the frequency in the sharpening from the area of the water or the camera blur that I don't want. That sort of control is something that I've not had before, at least not quickly and easily. And to me, it's super, super exciting. Who knows where it can go for you from there. Now, second of all, too, let me show you real quick. I'm going to zoom in here. Finally, we'll go ahead and just run the regular one curves, the automatic one, which, to be honest, the frequencies that I use on the automatic ones have worked for almost every single image. No, I've not tried it on a 100 megapixel image, but, usually what we want to sharpen is the higher frequencies anyway. And this kind of accounts for high and high medium. It doesn't account for the really broader ones unless you're doing contouring. Now, here we go. Let's say I go to medium curves and I'm going to really boost that strong. Boom. Okay, something like that. I can also hit right here. I can say blend if shadows. Okay, that's very, very subtle. And this is what I was talking about. It's not quite as strong as in some of the other ways that we use it. Okay, so right now we just only have it in on the shadows. You see that? Now, with that blend if option still there for you, you can also technically do that on the actual frequency layer if you really want. Remember we talked about removing some of that? Let's say we don't want that frequency at all on the shadows. I don't know why. So we're going to take that frequency and put highs. Now that frequency is gone. It slowly fades away into the shadows. And let me go ahead and just kind of reset this one. Okay. If for some reason we wanted that look, which kind of has a vintagey kind of quality to it, off and on, it makes the shadows get softer and softer and softer in appearance and perception because we're removing that frequency from highlights to shadows. It slowly goes away. The opposite can also be true on high. We can flip it to shadows, and now the shadows are sharp, and then the light areas become softer and softer. That's a pretty committed kind of change, but it's still something you can do when you have all these frequencies separated. You haven't completely destroyed the image because you're working with only one specific frequency, but you created a very unique sort of look. There it is. On. Okay, we left the highlights without that frequency, and the shadows do have them. Again, if we flip it, you see that look. Now the water, the dark areas in this particular part of the shot, the dark areas don't have that frequency and the light areas do. And we haven't even boosted sharpening or anything like that, okay? If we did, with one of our presets, there we go. Now we've increased the sharpening into the highlights, and it goes away and the frequency completely vanishes into the shadows. It's not necessarily this is what you must do. It's that flexibility to play around and dial in the sharpening exactly like you want. Now in a shot like this, super high res landscape, you might want to print this thing 60 by 40 for all I know. And if you do, those little nuanced details of how you sharpen are very, very important. A quick over sharpening for Instagram is one thing, but when you really want to dial in sharpening for something that's going to be a large art print, a gallery showing or something like that, those details are important, including blend if, including, negative and positive contrast, and including masking of all kinds. That is what I'm talking about. That is why Ultrasharp is called Ultrasharp. It's not just about the amount of sharpening, but it's about all the abilities and functions that you have in the action set. So I'm very, very excited about this one. I have been using it for a while now. Once I kind of developed a way to separate all the frequencies in one stack, that really opened up possibilities. And I'm sure this will continue to evolve. But check it out. Leave any comments you have below. And let me know if you're using it and how you're using it, because I'm going to be super excited to hear about that. And anyway, yeah, I'm very excited to welcome back Ultrasharp back into the lineup, and this time as powerful actions.